Welcome back, everyone. Hope you are refreshed from the short break. It is now time to hear the testimonies from Pastor Andre Ng and Miss Jennifer Heng on living through mental health challenges. Please continue to use Slido to post your questions and vote on one another's question. We will be showing you the link in the Zoom chat, so you can just click on the link in Zoom chat. It will bring you straight to the Slido. Okay, so over to you, Pastor Andre.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Privileged to join you for the conference and privileged to just share a bit of my own story. Thank you so much, organizers, for the invitation. Now, I have the privilege of pastoring a church. I've done so for the last 3 years now. I first took over the church at 27 years old. I was a baby basically when I took over the church. Now at the point of time I was newly married, was adjusting to married life, as well as fresh into my new role as a pastor of a congregation of about 250 persons. Now, if you can imagine, at 27, I was young, driven, eager to prove myself, and so I'll keep myself up, most nights, really working, and because of that, I would sleep maybe 2-3 hours a night. This was all over a prolonged period, and of course led to a really sedentary lifestyle. I was eating food at all sorts of wrong hours. But more than that, I was really chronically stressed and anxious all the time. I remember, I would wake up in the middle of the night, my bed completely drenched in sweat because I just had a panic attack and I was just anxious all the time. And there were moments in the middle of the night I would wake up feeling deathly afraid because I felt like my heart was going to leap out of my chest. And that was just normal for me. I lived that kind of life for months. And this was all into my first year of pastoring a church. Now, even though I knew all of this was concerning, I did what I thought was the rightful thing to do. I just buried myself more deeply into work because I thought to myself then, if I were to leave my church, what would happen to them, or I thought to myself, if people actually knew I was struggling, would they still have confidence in me as a leader? Would they gradually lose respect for me? And I remember then the dominant emotion I felt for this struggle that I was experiencing was that of shame. I was just deeply ashamed that I was struggling. Now things came to a head for me personally when I started to feel like there was something wrong with my body. It was just just a sense I had there was something wrong, and so I did a blood test. I went for a blood test, and and that weekend following the blood test, I was speaking in church, and coincidentally, I was doing a series on miracles. I was talking about the power of God, and I was doing a message on unanswered prayer. And so after I wrapped up the sermon, my wife comes running to me and said, "Your doctor called, and he said you have to come to the hospital now." And so I left real swiftly for the hospital, and I went in, and basically the doctor was surprised to see that I was still functioning because my blood work suggested that I would show up delirious and severely weak at least. It actually showed that I was at risk of a stroke, and that's why they were very concerned and asked me to rush in. And so the long and short of it, is that I received a tremendously bad diagnosis that day, and started to be placed on a whole lot of medication. And I remember it was a whirlwind of a day. I had this diagnosis, and I was also trying to reconcile what I had just spoken about that morning with what was happening to me just an hour later. And it was just a really challenging day, and that was all. That happened my first year into pastoring. Now the next day was Monday, and I think traditionally we know that Mondays are just very challenging days for pastors. You're coming off the Sunday high, and so for me that day I started to really battle with a whole lot of negative thinking. It wasn't the first time, but things really spiraled out of control, and I started to contemplate suicide for hours. I remember it was just a really dark day. It wasn't the first time I contemplated suicide. I do remember moments in my childhood where I was prone to do so, but this was by far the most intense. And it seems irrational in hindsight, but at a point in time, it just felt like the most logical thing to do. So, I struggled for hours, and then I just thought like I need to distract myself. And so I turned to the world of social media. I know some of us feel have different feelings about social media, but I was just trying to distract myself. And so I started going on Facebook, started scroll, and then I chanced upon an article, and I believe it was provision, sheer provision that I chanced upon this article. And so I chanced upon it, and it was an article about a young lead pastor, roughly about my age, who, after a prolonged bout of depression, battling with mental health, committed suicide in his office, leaving behind 3 boys and his wife. And at that moment when I read the article, I started to weep and weep, and I thought to myself, this is something that I absolutely do not want to do to my wife. And we were newly married then. And so, I wish I could say that following that article, I all of a sudden, like, was all okay. But I nevertheless still struggled, even though I managed to snap out that moment. Personally, I grew up in a tradition that does not really have a strong emphasis on mental health and wellness. I remember growing up hearing sayings like, you don't burn out, you burn on. And so I always associated like struggling with like something that was just incompatible with faith. And we also strongly believe in the miraculous, and I still do deep in my soul. And we really believe, in uh, God being able to bring change, healing, deliverance in an instance. And I wholeheartedly believe in that. But that was not my story, and that's not what happened to me. I started to put in discipline, embrace counseling. I started exercise regularly, and I lost a whole bunch of weight. And today, I'm off all my medications. Praise God. And I've also put in spiritual practices like the Sabbath, which has been really, really good for my soul. And I've also started seeing a counselor, a spiritual director, and also talking to different pastors as well. Now, I wish I could say that things are all good now, but I still struggle. And I read Jesus' invitation, the gospel, to take on this yoke, which is easy, this burden is light. And I look at my own life, and I often see a stark disparity. As a point to bring up, I believe that organizationally things needs to be addressed. In some environments, expectations surrounding a pastor's role can be downright unreasonable, if I can be honest. Pastors are expected to be counselor, therapist, community organizer, theologian, executive director, CEO, all at the same time. And so I realize that many pastors leave their job not because their sense of calling or vocation has changed, but they do so sadly because of a lack of support or the inability to cope with unrealistic demands. And another thought is this, final thought is that pastors, even though we are steeped in spiritual activity, I go to church more than anyone in my congregation. Even though we're steeped in spiritual activity, we're not immune to emotional brokenness and mental health challenges. We're simply not. And I'll even go further to say that we are more prone to it. And so our goal of emotional wholeness and mental wellness cannot be separate or distinct from our goal of spiritual maturity. If we desire to experience the promise of Scripture, that of life in all its fullness, then we must be whole in body, in soul, and in spirit. That's speaking about our mind. We must be whole and well mentally as well. And so that's my story. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Andre, for your frank sharing. Really appreciate you revealing so much of your inner struggles for all of us. And just so proud of you. Thank you for being vulnerable with all of us here. Yes. So there's a need for us to be able to find a safe place that we can talk about it openly. And for our brokenness can serve as encouragement to others as well. And certainly, Andre and Jennifer, your sharing have encouraged many of us. On that note, I'd like to also raise some questions that there are many people in the participant have already keyed in the Slido. I'm going to ask some of them for you, but let me just say this to all the participants. All your questions are important to us. We value your questions, and because of time, we may not be able to answer all the questions, but what we'll do is that we'll archive the questions, and the committee members will try to answer them after the conference, right? So with that, let me just ask the first question. How do you think we can change the culture in the church where we don't burn out, but we burn up and put pastors and leaders on the pedestal with no place to fall? So what do you think we can change? What can we do to change this culture? The pastor can only burn up, cannot burn out. Andre or Jen, you want to jump on?
Yeah, I'll go first. I think it's important to see pastors for their humanity as opposed to their utility. As human beings, we all struggle. Uh, I've, my counselor once said to me that struggle defines our common experience. And so we need to normalize this, that we all struggle, even for pastors. And so, there are practical things that we can do, which is, making sure that we don't have like a key man risk, where everything is just leveraged on one person, to have a bit of plurality, on certain with leadership and just making sure that everything is not just leveraged on one person. The burden can be just damaging and overwhelming. And on struggle, I think many pastors just experience shame, and the shame really has to do with certain responses when you go through stuff. For me personally, when I was going through my struggle, there are a few things that happened. First, people try to tell you that it's not such a big deal, kind of get over it, and then or some people try to relate, right? Very empathetic. They're like, I have troubles also. Here's what I'm going through, and so we all have troubles. But the most painful thing would be when people just distance themselves from you when you're hurting, and it's not with any kind of malice, but because people just don't know how to deal with pain really. And so when we learn as a community to do that better, to come around people who are hurting, to stand with them, to walk with them, I think that will bring a lot of healing to not just the soul but to entire cultures really. And so yeah.
Thanks, Andre. Good question. How can we change the culture? And then it's related to the second question, how can we overcome shame and all that? I think that's where we hope that with Jen and with Andre sharing their struggle, that for us pastors that we can find the comfort to say that it is okay for us to admit that we are not okay. The Korean movie, it's okay not to be okay, something like that. Yeah, and I think our congregation need to know that we can be real. Just as the psalmists in the book of Psalms, they are very real about their emotions. And I think we just all need to begin to take down the need to look good on stage. We need to look real on stage, not good. Yeah. On that note, let me ask the next question. What kind of support can we give to pastors and others serving full time in church? What kind of support you think would be good? Yeah. Beside giving them a free voucher to see a therapist.
Yeah, I would like to echo Jen's comment on seeking professional help. I've also begun to do so, and it's been really, really nourishing. It's really surfaced a lot of like inner dysfunction, and I remember the first few sessions, I was just talking to him, and I was like, "So when am I going to get fixed?" I was trying to get back to like some kind of like I'm solvent now, but really I've discovered like it's just a value for like a regular, consistent thing that serves as deterrent, but also, just regular assessment for your spiritual state. And I think as a pastor, I would like to say this, and some pastors might disagree, but I think it's very easy to be functional, to satisfy all of your functional roles, even whilst being like mentally unsound or emotionally broken. You can very well do it. And so don't be yeah, don't think that just because you're functional then you're emotionally okay. You can very easily perform the role. And so one of the things that's very needful is just a regular assessment, be it a framework or like even sending pastors to see therapists and psychiatrists to kind of assess their emotional well-being. I think that is an important thing that we can do. Organizationally, I think there are things that, like having a person to look after the welfare of pastor. I think that's very important. We don't want to run the extreme of like the entire community just cares for the pastor. I think that's not the extreme we want to run to, but having designated people look into it, that's great. Put in place a sabbatical policy. wholeheartedly believe in the Sabbath, put in place sabbatical policy, and I think the other last thing I would say practically is help if you are part of a church committee and you're especially in a leadership role and able to influence the pastor, no, help the pastor put in place boundaries. The tendency for pastors is to go above and beyond, and the tendency of congregations is to expect the pastors to go above and beyond. And so we need kind of healthy boundaries set in place. And so what my committee has done for me and what I've set in place is that on Mondays, nobody gets in touch with me. It's an unspoken rule, and so if you really need something, there are good channels, but nobody texts me on Monday, and I'm not expected to reply. And that's just a day dedicated for rest that we have fought for. Yeah.
Thank you. Jennifer, anything to add? Yeah. Okay. The next question could be from a fellow pastor, balancing authenticity and expectation of the congregation. How much of your situation would you share with the church? How would you deal with the congregation's expectation of pastors? Yeah.
Yeah. The kind of leaders I had growing up were like they looked to me like they were like superheroes and infallible, and so well into my leadership, I thought that was the kind of leader I had to be. And so definitely we can move away from that and as leaders embrace a certain level of vulnerability even with our congregants. With vulnerability, I think that it's just wise to have like circles of trust, and to like varying degrees of depth to which you go to. I wouldn't advocate for just completely being like uber duper bare, raw, honest, uh, especially when you're going through stuff from the pulpit. For some, they don't know what to do with the information. It can be very disconcerting for some. So I think there is a kind of wisdom, prudency there. And I think even for like pastors, right, I think my tendency really is like I can share something vulnerable, but I need to like wrap it up in hope. I need to like introduce some kind of redemptive arc. And if I can be honest, right, sometimes when I share vulnerability, I don't have a redemptive arc in mind. I don't. I'm just in the thick of it, and it's troubling me. It's painful, and so in that scenarios, I don't want to be vulnerable from the front. I want to have a close circle of friends who can sit with me in my pain. I think the Psalms really, really instruct us well in this tradition of lament, of grieving, of mourning. Some of the Psalms, like the David Psalms, they end well. Usually like there's like a yet I will praise you, but there are some Psalms like one of the Psalms from Heman, it's like it doesn't end well. And I need to have some of those moments with trusted friends as well. Yeah, so that's what I'll say.
Thanks for qualifying what I said earlier, that we need to calibrate our sharing. But I think somewhere along the line, we need to calibrate, and we also need to model the way for the church to see that it is okay to express your struggle and talk about it. Even for pastors, we need to find safe friends that we can go to. And similarly for church members, they need to find safe people that they can go to as well. There's a question about discipling the church. And that is how can we disciple the church without overloading the members who are eager to serve and invest and care for people? How can we disciple the church in a more holistic way? Yes.
I'd like to agree it's a very, very big question, but just a small piece in just the overall kind of equation. We as a church, we endeavor to do something pretty ambitious. We talked about church wounding really recently in our congregation, and we did like a survey just polling people on like whether they have been wounded in the context of the church environment. And many of the stories have like a common theme, which is they were going through something, or they were tired and just spiritually just fatigued, and then they were pushed to just keep going on, and they were just very wounded by the experience, and I think just echoing something that I said earlier is it's that when people feel like that their humanity isn't seen, but they're just purely seen for their utility, and I think one of the things that we can do culturally is like to really readjust what our priorities are. Our priorities are things getting done, or are we after people flourishing spiritually? I think of this thing that Eugene Peterson said when he first became a pastor. He was very disturbed by the lack of prayer that he was having in his life as he entered into his pastoral vocation. He had perceived himself to be always praying for people, and caring for souls, but he was just caught up in the organization of things. And then, he introduced like what is his paradigm for pastoral leadership. It says that the pastor is primarily a physician of souls. And what I said earlier is that pastors have like multiple hats these days. But perhaps one of the things that we need to do is just to really distill down like what is the key function and role biblically of what a pastor is to be for his people. And I think if we embrace that we are primarily physician of souls, then it will really be reflected in the way we interact and in what our priorities are culturally as well. Yep.
Thank you. Just now, both Pastor and Andre and Jennifer mentioned the power of having a community that journey with them. So the question here in Slido is there a need for pastors or pastoral staff support groups for better personal soul care in Singapore? Is there any plan or are there existing groups currently?
I would
Pastor?
say, I know that, one of the intended fruits of the conference is that we will have more networks. But I think pastorally, we need less networks and more friendships. We need settings to which like we can do live and share honestly and openly. And I think we're making steps towards in the right direction where a lot of the groups I'm part of these days, we're talking less about church attendance, numbers, and strategies, but we're talking about family life and how we're doing, in the face of challenges. And so more of that, support groups. I'm an advocate for like group counseling, group pastoral counseling. I think that can be really, really powerful, and I believe it's countercultural in many ways. So yes, advocate for that.
Thank you.
Thank you, both Pastor Andre and Jennifer, for your sharing.